Greetings all, BWS2K here with the 6th video in our deep dive series on the Marvel character Marrow. We're going to move fast today, but first we need to take a slight detour and we need to look over at Uncanny X-Men Annual from 1997. So let me see if I can pull that up. There we go. It was released a month after Marrow's appearance in Uncanny X-Men number 346, which was the Zero Tolerance one, with Spidey and Marrow and Callisto. We have, in this issue, we have the X-Men helping to defend a village in Salima. I hope I'm saying that right. Salima Oasis in the Sudan, where the Morlocks, which are actually called Gene Nation here. That's one of the other things that changed over time is, so you have the Morlocks. The Morlocks are taken to the Hill Dimension. Marrow leads Gene Nation, who is ostensibly the sort of next generation or second generation Morlocks, and then from there, because some writers used Morlocks and Gene Nation interchangeably, and sometimes I think it applied more specifically, and sometimes they didn't. Because what we have here is this is the group of Morlocks / Gene Nation, because certainly the first generation weren't all dead, right? Like Callisto wasn't dead, but was she part of Gene Nation? No, she would be considered a Morlock, right? She's not in this issue, but it's the group. Do you remember the stadium full, when Cable said it's a stadium's worth of people? It's those Morlocks / Gene Nation that were exiled in Storm number 4. She said that she was going to put them in an African village that needed to be worked on, and so this is that community, all right? And they have a leader named Degard, D''Gard, and his mutant powers seem to be kind of empathic related, psionic, something to that effect. It's not really super elaborated on. Marrow isn't actually in this issue, but Dark Beast is, and he again thinks about being the creator of Gene Nation. He says, quote, "No one, not even Prelate Summers himself," which is, Prelate is like a rank from Age of Apocalypse, right? But he's thinking this. "Not even Prelate Summers himself is the wiser. The birth of Gene Nation was the result of my genius, and it disgusts me to see their potential wasted in such a manner. My elite strain of genetically engineered warriors, reduced to pitiable creatures with no backbone. Storm and Rasputin are both to blame for this affront, and someday soon I will hunt them down and spill their blood in recompense." And I would maybe the next step is to just kind of trace back, because I do have a list of all the Dark Beast and Mikhail Rasputin. I'd love to go down that rabbit trail sometime, but I just didn't care enough to see. This sort of thing gets referenced a lot, but I don't know that there was ever a confrontation or really ever a full plan explained. It's just kind of like assumed that he had been experimenting and did this whole thing. But anyway, that community is being attacked. The X-Men show up. The day is saved. And Degard, so there's two factions that show up. There's the X-Men proper that you see on the cover there, but then, well, you can see Alex's hand, Alex Summers on the left. X-Factor shows up as well. X-Factor? Yeah, I think they're X-Factor at the time. And essentially the two factions that show up to defend the Gene Nation community are, the X-Men are saying, "We'll defend you and you should be living in peace," and then Alex and the X Factor crew is saying, like, "We've got to strike back. The best defense is a good offense." And so the community is kind of like torn in terms of loyalties, but in the end, they decide that Storm is no longer fit for their leadership, but neither are they going to follow Alex Summers. So they kind of declare themselves as their own group, cutting ties in terms of like a hierarchy of leadership. And as far as I am aware, as far as I could find, this is the only appearance of Degard prior to this next issue that we are going to cover. Awesome. I had to rearrange some things in OBS, but it seems to be working well. Fingers crossed. So this is Weapon X, and some things we're calling it Weapon X the Draft, but it's Weapon X the Draft Marrow, or Weapon X Marrow. Basically, there's going to be a Weapon X series, but before that, they had prologue issues that each one featured or focused rather on the main characters who are going to be in the proper series. So this is the one that focused on Marrow, and it was written by Christina Z, who is not the writer for the series that not all of the issues of Weapon X that we're going to cover. In fact, we're going to do something of an overview here. But at any rate, this issue itself is Marrow centric, and I'm just going to start Reading my notes and stop riffing. The opening text reads in part, quote, "A former X-Man in the ranks of Weapon X seemed inevitable and oddly appropriate, since one of their top operatives was a part of our program at its very genesis. Ironically, many parallels have been drawn between Marrow and Wolverine, and I delight in that irony." This is like written by the sort of professor's or the director's point of view. "Perhaps it will be proven, as I anticipate, that the primary difference between Marrow and Wolverine is that her spirit can be broken. Like most former, quote, heroes, the best way to test the loyalties of a new operative is to force them to betray someone who trusts them. Or, better yet, send her after a man who saved her life." So apparently Marrow went to Weapon X in order to be given a beautiful body. Quote, "Marrow has come to me in search of something no one has ever been able to give her, a normal body. She dreams of living life as a beautiful woman, the existence that has forever eluded her." Yeah. Okay, moving on. So they alter her genetic code or whatever, and they end up slowing and even stopping the bone growth, so she can still control them, but they don't pop through her skin. And the doctor notes that it might make her less powerful, but that there's no hint of that being the case. We're talking Weapon X here, right? So it's all double meanings, and it's manipulation and that sort of thing. And even as readers, if we're looking to study the character, we have to kind of remember that. The director is saying it might make her weaker, but it's really just a ploy for him on the character. It doesn't actually, in anything that we observe, make her weaker. In fact, I dare say you see her at her strongest in the Weapon X series. But regardless, the whole process works, right? And she becomes sort of, quote, beautiful. And she says she wants to be called Sarah. And then he promises her that her body is not going to change back. It won't revert back. But her first mission is to go out. Because at first she's hesitant to go out and do a mission. She's like, I need some time by myself. And he's like, well, we don't really have that kind of time. And she says, but my body's not going to change back. And he says, no, but you need to get going on your missions, right? So her first mission is actually to kill Degard, the person that we just talked about before. And he's a former member of Gene Nation, and they say that he's a captive of a rival agency, which, whatever. Again, could be manipulation. We don't know. And it is someone who saved Sarah's life once. That is revealed. She says that. She acknowledges that. So she takes a night out on the town at, it seems to be the disco. Do you remember when we talked about the disco where there were all those murders from Gene Nation? This seems to be that place. And she's thinking back to it, like the last time I was here. But she also thinks, I would, quote, "I would give anything to be normal." And the whole thing ends up, the whole night ends up being, she ends up being intimate with someone who she thinks is someone that she meets in the club, but it ends up being Marrow. And she ends up fighting him and Kane, who is another member of Weapon X. And she takes him down. Now, Marrow is not particularly, he's a mutant. He can hypnotize or do things like that, mental manipulation or something like that. And she is fighting him, and she says something, and I don't remember, I don't have the quote written down, but she says something to the effect of, "I still have my bone powers," or "I still can control my bones." And she grows them out of her palm and stabs him in the neck. Kane is like a cyborg. He's like a kind of a big guy, and she throws him around without much of a problem. So if we were looking for evidence that she has some kind of enhanced strength, and we'll talk more about it in a later video, I think, not even today, but in a later video when we do a little bit more of a summary. But I wonder sometimes if it's increased strength or if it's just her bone density and the way that she's able to manipulate her skeleton. I don't know if it's an increased or enhanced musculature as much as it is the skeletal system, but whatever. At any rate, she takes them both down. And she realizes the whole thing was kind of a setup. And she decides that she's going to go through with her mission to kill Degard. She doesn't even sneak up on him. He recognizes her, and they exchange words, and she basically says, "I'm going to kill you fast because you saved my life, and I owe you that much," or something to that effect. And then we kind of cut to her on the top of the Brooklyn Bridge. It says it's the Brooklyn Bridge. And it's raining, and she's thinking back about life and whatever. And she jumps. And of course, there's this whole overview, the director's notes, kind of throughout the issue. But she ends up returning to Weapon X. And when she gets there, the director is like, "Ah, Sarah, good to see you." And she says, "Don't call me Sarah, call me Marrow." So it's kind of this whole little arc. All right. stick to your notes, PW. We have Christina Z writing here, as I mentioned, and this is sort of a precursor to the launch of the Weapon X title, which itself has different writers. I kind of mentioned at the beginning. Each of the main characters got their own prologue issue, and this is Marrow's. The artwork makes her look fairly anorexic, especially in the first few panels, but I'm thinking maybe this is, they were kind of going with a bony look, so they were accentuating the skeleton. It reminds me the most of Aeon Flux, if you've ever seen that cartoon, or even the Pitch Black cartoon. There was an animated, I forget what it was called. They were like on a spaceship or something like that. But it's like, or even some of the Animatrix animations. Like it's very bony and accentuated, and yeah, it's very stylistic. I don't know if I liked it or not, but it was definitely a style. And anyway, so they did that, and of course it ends up, she ends up being more traditionally beautiful by the end anyway, so it's not a huge deal. Okay, I said I would keep my biases out of these kinds of things as much as I could, but we're well into territory where I've kind of set that disclaimer aside. This whole thing feels like a betrayal of what we know about the character Marrow so far. So with everything that we've covered, can you imagine her killing a fellow Jean National just to be beautiful again? She did when she had to survive, like on the Hill Dimension, and there's no reason she wouldn't kill somebody for other reasons, but her whole reason is that she wants to be pretty again? Marrow? Like, does that even track? If she wanted to be pain-free, I could understand that. Like, I could understand the emphasis of not wanting to be in pain anymore. But then she does know someone who can do this. The High Evolutionary did it. The Shadow King said he could. S.H.I.E.L.D. has that serum from the one-shot there with Spider-Man, where she was Sarah Rushman, the alias Sarah Rushman. My goodness. Maybe it's possible with all that has happened that she doesn't remember those things, or her memory is fuzzy. Who could blame her? But I don't think she would go this far. I could even see if she'd been sent, like from a story perspective, if she'd been sent to kill Storm or Callisto or Wolverine or some other big name, it might have some appeal to the character and to the reader. But to guard, like some rando Jean National, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't hate the issue, and I don't even hate this whole run. I just contend that it's a drastic reimagining of our gal. The visuals, in my opinion, get better over time. I do like her new look in the first half of the series or so. They go back to a more elven look by the end, and we're going to show that here in a second. As her bone growths start to grow back. Other than the usual Weapon X series, there is a great plot arc where the director assigns Marrow to take down Sabretooth, and the two battle in a tunnel, and she pops Wolverine claws, which is, so like, basically, I'm not going to cover each of the issues of the Weapon X series. In fact, I can show you the next cover, because, yeah. So this is like, what, issue 2? And they did like covers of each person, and this is this. And then I think the next one, so this is much later on, as her bone growth start to come back. Interestingly enough, she gets like the tiara thing back, like the tiara bone crest or whatever, but that's not what we see even on the cover of the issue. So again, it's that appearance is like constantly shifting. But throughout the series, she really only kind of has like 2 main stories that she does. One of them is she is given the assignment by the director to kill, or well, to bring Sabretooth back by any means necessary. And he pushes the Morlock button. Like he shows her, like he's riling her up about the Morlock tunnels. And so she confronts Sabretooth in like a culvert underneath the facility or something like that. They're on a big dam or something. I'm not really sure. And he's like, basically, you're not worth my time. And then she pops claws like Wolverine. And there's just a great moment because it's like, it's not even that it's Marrow anymore that would be getting under Sabretooth's skin. It's this idea that, oh, you're going to pretend to be Wolverine? Well, now I'm going to have to kill you. Like, it's just classic Sabretooth. Anyway, they fight. She ends up washing him out of the culvert. He doesn't die. Of course he doesn't die. But he gets washed out of the culvert. She wins the little battle that they have. And she's like, that one's for the Morlocks. But then later on, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me double check my notes here. Yeah, with Sabretooth. And then, so there's also this story that's going on of Cable and his underground, I don't know if it's called the Underground or it's just never given a name and it's referred to as the Underground Organization or whatever. He infiltrates the Weapon X facility and he ends up being defeated and losing short-term memory. Marrow rescues him, and on the way, like as she's driving or flying them away, Cable starts to wake up, and she's like, oh, you said that I could help you out. Remember, you said you were going to give me all your secret information on that disc? And Cable is kind of woozy. Oh, yeah, okay, here. So she gets Cable's underground network and contacts and facility and access and resources, and she uses it to reform Gene Nation. And she ends up striking back at Weapon X in a very terrorist sort of fashion. Like she blows up some of their facilities and things like this. Innocents end up getting killed as a result. So she kind of goes back to becoming this terrorist again, sort of. Agent Zero infiltrates that facility, the headquarters that she's using for Gene Nation, and ends up killing everyone there, which includes Hemingway and Vessel and like all of her classic buddies, all of them except for her. And he's got her and he's ready to kill her. And she says something like, how does she say? I'm willing to die for what I believe in, but the word is you aren't, which is kind of a reference to a different story. And he says, no, he's not going to kill her because she'll become a martyr. And so he's going to go back and hunt down all the members of Gene Nation first, and then like come after her. And that's kind of the last we see of Marrow in the Weapon X series. And it's a good series. I didn't hate it. There were high points and low points. And even the way they treated this character wasn't bad. It's so jarring to read some of these things, especially in terms of her arc starting with, I'm going to kill somebody that saved my life, a fellow Morlock or a fellow Gene National, and I'm going to do this because I want to be pretty. And then it ends with the bone growth's coming back and I want to be a terrorist again. Like, it just, I don't know. It feels, it's a take for sure. All right, so let's move on. This is going to be, some of these are going to be really short entries. And, like I've said before, I didn't do a ton of back reading, because it's not necessary. So this is Generation M. This is number 4. This is from April of 2006. And I've got my water here. It picks up a week after M Day, which is when Scarlet Witch says no more mutants. And so Sally Floyd is publishing mutant stories. She's like a journalist. And they are ex-mutant stories, or they're ex-mutants now. So it's their stories. Like she had is it called Mutant Diaries, I think was her column. And now it's called Ex-Mutant Diaries or something like that. And so now post M Day, she gets sent a picture by someone who is killing off depowered mutants. And the picture that she gets sent is of a pile of Morlocks, which are outside of a sewer like entrance grate or something. It actually is most reminiscent of the one where she and Spider-Man were fighting hunger, like the crowd that was gathered outside the sewer entrance. Anyway, so she gets this picture and there's a sign that says not enough died. So there's kind of like this serial killer vibe to this series. And I didn't bother to read enough to know. Though if I had to guess based on what I see in this issue, the serial killer would be Sabretooth, but they don't really even show or reveal that. Her next issue of her column features the Morlocks, and Marrow, who is in her green uniform and curved horns. We read, quote, "There has been one constant in the lives of these creatures, a remarkable woman known as Marrow, who has lived at times in the sewers and has championed the Morlocks' cause for many years. She's an uncompromising figure, often reviled by police and media alike. The first time I interviewed her for the diaries, she threatened to kill me twice." And then so that's kind of what we read. There's like a picture of the column, but then it kind of transitions into actually seeing the meeting. So we're reading their conversation. And Marrow says, 2 weeks ago, I received word that there'd been an incursion from the surface. All I knew for sure was that there'd been some kind of commotion. When I got here, I found 13 dead. The ambulances never arrived. We stacked the corpses in a pile when they began to rot, and then we burned them. And I'm fast forwarding through the conversation, but she also says, you have social security numbers and credit cards. Such indignities afford you the privilege of police and ambulance services. Before M Day, I would have said yes, that Morlocks feel safer in the tunnels. But we've lost over 2/3 of our number. Over 4/5 of the remainder also lost their Morlock shape or powers or both. But they stay because they have nowhere else to go. Very soon, they're going to realize they can make it on the surface. If that happens, I don't know that we'll survive. She says that she'll stay until the bitter end. I made an oath. Let me tell you something. When I was a child, I thought I might grow up to be beautiful, like you. I thought things on the surface mattered. But this happened to me instead. And she points to her back where the bone growth. So in theory, she was depowered, but it was like her bones didn't go away. They're just now permanently there. So she has this big bone growth on her back. My disfigurement is a trophy, a reminder that beauty and ugliness can coexist. I believe humanity can accept the Morlocks as they are, without change. I hear and see everything they do. I taste their potential. But until the day comes that they can leave here and remain free, I'll stay. They need me now more than ever. Irving, who is this small Morlock, I don't know if it's a child or what, there's no real indication of age, but has been kind of following them along. Irving has nothing, Miss Floyd. No possessions, no income, no family. The least I can do is offer him hope. So there's more going on, but that's the Marrow piece of this issue. So we have Jenkins writing. This is after the Weapon X series, which ended in the fall of 2004. So this is years, plural, after. The art, in my opinion, isn't super great, but it's always a subjective thing. I didn't prefer it, but it's certainly stylized and fits the rest of the issue. And I think there should be a bit of a gritty uncomfortableness to what we're reading. So I don't think it's a bad choice at all. It's just not as aesthetically pleasing in the going from Weapon X to this is sort of jarring. Marrow seems to have been stuck with bone growths mid-depowering, though it doesn't appear that she's in pain. So I'm not really sure how that works. She's portrayed here as taking on the role of a caring, nurturing mother figure to the Morlocks, which is neat. Some sources, and I wasn't reading comics during M-Day. So some sources are saying that she's a like a remnant, a mutant who lost most of her powers, but not all, or like, I'm not really sure how it works. That's a new one on me when I was writing this up. I just thought it was you either had them or you didn't, but I guess for some mutants, they kept some parts of it. I don't know. But anyway, I'm not really interested in going too far into it because it's not important. But we do see her using knives in our next comic, which was published only a couple months later. So let's look at that. So that's X Factor. We're going to go these really quickly because it really doesn't matter. So we have a group of depowered mutants who believe that the government is responsible for M-Day, and they form a group called X-Cell. And they are essentially a terrorist group. The final panel of this issue has Marrow showing up with knives, and her hair, or like where her hair would be, she has like bone cornrows, like it's cornrows, but it's all bony growths, whatever. She says, "Siren, M, it's been a long time," which I thought was hilarious because we've just covered everything that Marrow's been in, and she's never seen either of those. So the writer here is David. She's only in the closing panel, but she'll be more in this one, which is X Factor 19. Marrow, Fatal, I think that's how you'd say that. Fatal and Blob are all depowered, and they all confront Monet and Siren. Siren goes to apprehend Marrow, who is wearing a pack of knives on her back, which she had the bone growths, but maybe they got removed, or this is over top of it. But she's not using bones. She's actually using real like combat knives, stabbing knives, throwing knives. And there's a brief fight. Callisto shows up later, and she is throwing knives as well. The crux of the plot, as pertains to what we're reading, as best I can figure out, is that Quicksilver is somehow able to restore powers to mutants, but maybe it doesn't quite work reliably and they might die. Cal seems to indicate that that has happened, or there might be problems. And also X-Cell is a group that thinks that the government is behind the depowering, so there's a lot of like trying to protect the truth, because apparently some people think if it becomes widely known that it was a mutant who was responsible, there could be all kinds of consequences from that. Sure. I'll talk, if I don't mention it later, I'll mention it now. It's really annoying how oftentimes we read a story and then Marvel just erases it or reboots it from continuity. And I think M-Day was one of those things which could have been much, I don't know, should have been longer lasting. But again, as I said, I didn't read much to do with it, so maybe there were some good stories in there. So this is X Factor 20. And this is kind of the last of the three there. So Quicksilver is restoring powers with Richter. He's using Richter to kind of like channel through. And Marrow is supposed to be next, but Callisto is there and tells her, she wants her to wait and to see if the power restoration stuff actually works first. Because it sounds like she had her powers restored this way, and then it didn't work out so well. And so she's like wanting Marrow to hold off. It's revealed that Quicksilver has been lying, and when he attempts to attack Layla, who is there for exposing him, Marrow and Cal attack him, and he's got like these duplicates, but I think it's like different places in the time stream or something like that. Again, I don't know, and I'm not interested. Marrow stabs him in the arm, and they finally deduced that this sort of thing was the M Day was from Wanda, and one of Quicksilver's dupes stabs Marrow in the left kidney. Apparently, the power transferal, the repowering thing isn't stable, as some of the previous recipients that we saw earlier, they actually explode in the streets, like they get overloaded with their power. So it becomes obvious that Marrow likely would have died. Richter uses his power to pull out some Terrigen crystals, which may have been the reason that Quicksilver was able to do any of this. They were embedded in Quicksilver, and the issue concludes, noting simply that Marrow and Cal got away. They escaped. So there's nothing particular special about all of this, but it is neat to see Cal helping out Marrow. We've seen Marrow helping out Callisto many times, and this is the first time I can remember where Marrow is being helped by Callisto. So it's kind of cool. I don't know if it was super intentional as a callback or anything, but it was neat. So the next couple issues are technically X-Men Legacy 212 and X-Men Origins Gambit. But there's just not much there. There's some cameos, a retelling of Gambit saving Sarah from the Mutant Massacre, leaves her with a police car comes out of the manhole, and he like leaves her with the police that are there outside the manhole. Nothing super amazing. Wolverine issue number 900. So it has a couple different stories, and the C story, the third story, it's called Desperate Measures. And it explicitly says that it takes place after the events of X-Men number 75, which is the one with Pilgrim, not the Nagari, but the ones who, I forget what they called themselves, but the one with Pilgrim. It's the story arc where Marrow gets thrown and we showed the picture of her like in flight and she's all smiles. Yeah, so this happens like before that. So in this story, Wolverine, Beast, Marrow, and there's some Morlocks named Kara, Ape, Poser, and Matchstick Girl. They are fleeing from a blast in the tunnels, and they end up in a dead end. 3 Sentinels were hunting in the tunnels. Wolverine describes the group as 2 X-Men, 5 Morlocks, which is interesting that he doesn't include, presumably he's talking about himself and Beast. He's not including Marrow as an X-Men. And then later on, he says there are hundreds of Morlocks the X-Men haven't encountered. So that one of the things that we have touched on, do you remember when Cerebro was masquerading as Professor X, and he had the sort of they weren't duplicates, they were like synthesized X-Men to fight the real X-Men, and there was this whole thing back and forth, and he was doing a scan at one point, and it said something like, so many numbers of mutants, not including subterranean scans. I think I mentioned, I don't remember how much of the issue I mentioned, but I'm pretty sure I mentioned that part. I'm pretty sure it was in my notes. And so here we have this indication that there are so many other Morlocks that the X-Men don't know about. And so one of the things that's kind of been consistent is they've never actually given a number of them, which I like. And even we know that it was a stadium's full that was in the Hill Dimension, but then they go to the Oasis and many of them die, but there's some of them that live, and so on and so forth, which I just think is nice that they keep the number fluid so that you're not, so you have plenty of room to make it a huge community or a small community, however the narrative fits. Anyway, so Marrow, so they're in the tunnels. Marrow, who knows the tunnels, tells them that they're trapped in this little pocket that they've been caved in, and she's angry. She's angry at Poser for attracting the Sentinels in the first place. There's a little bit of a flashback. Her spikes start growing, and she stands off with Logan. They kind of have a tiff. The space is filling up with water at the same time that Beast is trying to operate on, I believe it's Kara. She's been, gravely wounded or whatever. Wolverine basically assigns Marrow to get them out of there. There's a wall. It's sort of crumbly. She extends her bone growths into the ruins of the wall and then expands them, which crumbles it and frees them, and they're able to get out. And Wolverine points out that despite her previous words, she is not just a weapon after all, which actually kind of harkens back to something he had been thinking about himself earlier in the story. So it's a neat little vignette, a little flashback where we see that Marrow is capable of more than just being a stabby fighter, but it's not anything groundbreaking. It's just fun. Just a reminder. She used to be cool. Now we're getting into the rapid fire. So there's New Warriors, where she is literally just a cameo, and it doesn't quite match what she should look like, but whatever. X-Force, she has a run in X-Force in 2014, where she is and maybe you're not familiar with this reference, but she's basically Tiny Tina from Borderlands 2. She's just manic, she's nonsensical, she's shocking for shock's sake. She's just, it's almost just like superficially rude. There doesn't appear to be much more than that. She's just trying to be, get under everybody's skin. But also at the same time, it's like, oh no, I'm crazy, see? Whatever. An attempt is made to provide some genuine drama by having her being pregnant or portrayed as having been pregnant and then losing the child when she signed up to have her powers restored. Some big bad guy, rando guy, like restored her powers, but she's still depowered as a mutant. So these aren't her mutant powers. This is something else. But then later she goes to Krakoa. So she's obviously still a mutant. Messy, messy, messy is the theme. And it has been since the beginning. I had a thought though, as I was rereading, I wonder, and I didn't bother to look at the timeline, but I wonder if, it's probably not, right? It's probably not Mesmero's kid. Nah, that's too much time. Because we had M Day happen and all that stuff. Yeah, it's probably not the same. Anyway, so she, it doesn't, again, there's the motivations for signing up to have her powers restored. It's like, why would you want your powers? If you don't have your powers, like we didn't see her in pain post M Day. She was using knives. She's fighting. There was no indication that there was a problem other than that she had these bone growths, which feels like something you could just have removed surgically fairly easy. But she wants them restored, I guess. And she goes through this whole thing and sure. She gets a new look, but, again, I'm not going to cover this super in depth. It's not a bad run, the X-Force series, and she has some neat moments, but in terms of the character, there's no real arc, there's no real growth. It just kind of is sort of a static, she's the crazy girl. Moving on to X-Men Blue, numbers 7 through 9, during the Secret Empire story. And then later on in issue 34 and 36, she is part of Magneto's Brotherhood. New Brotherhood, which is actually how the series ends, is like this splash page of them, and she's in that. She makes a cameo in Domino Annual #1, which looks more like her older self, but she has the elven horns, and she's in a group for mutants that can't pass in, like, on the street. Like, they are obviously mutants, physically obviously mutants. And then later on, she gets recruited, I guess, briefly by Emma Frost to the Hellfire Club. In Uncanny X-Men number 19 and number 20, her appearance is all over the place, my notes say. But then ultimately Wolverine slashes Marrow and tells Elixir to save her. So I didn't read the whole series. If you haven't picked up on that pattern yet, I don't typically read the whole series. But I try to get the context. And as best I can tell, Emma Frost is just like, hey, I want Marrow to be on my team. And she goes shopping with Marrow and they get clothes and it's great. And in the next issue, she body slams Wolverine out of skyscraper and she lands on the ground and she's injured. And then Wolverine is telling Elixir, like, hey, take... Sorry about that. My alarm's going off. Wolverine basically tells Elixir to go, heal her and don't worry about the rest of them because the rest of them are losers. And that's it. That's all we see. So, like, what was the point of Marrow being... What were the writers thinking of why would they have Marrow be here if they're just going to have her body slam Wolverine and then be done? It just... I don't know. Okay. Deep breath. We get to House of X and all of the associated X titles with House of X, right? So I'm just going to read straight from my notes. Try to keep my biases out. My feelings on modern Marvel aside, Marrow is shown on Krakoa, but she's not heard, like she doesn't have any speaking parts in House of X number 5, Excalibur number 1, and X-Force number 9, mostly in her classic green costume and bony protrusion rude girl appearance. And then a throwback to her black vest and punk look a year later in Marauders number 19, where Lowtown becomes Muty Town, I think, and there's a place called the Princess Bar, something like that. There's a short story in Women of Marvel 21, like 2021, which shows her getting a roommate named Farrell, who is a Morlock and is actually Thorne's sister. Remember Thorne from way back in the first Marrow issue that we covered? So Marrow's appearance and demeanor here are much more based on her X-Force persona than anything. That kind of, Tiny Tina, I'm crazy and angsty and emotional and whatever. So like that little piece in Women of Marvel. It's like a short story. She makes an appearance as one of Magic's Dark Riders in Curse of the Man-Thing #1, where she is, and I put, nicer and prettier, I guess? Question mark. There's a hint of something interesting for Marrow in an issue called The Secret X-Men, but it ultimately doesn't really go anywhere, and it gets sort of erased, and it was a one-off, I think, anyway. But she did have space armor, so that teaches us something about bones. I guess you can make a visor out of them too. She somehow was able to see in space. But Sabretooth #3 shows her in one panel from behind, looking like her more classic green uniform version, which is typically, and I think we mentioned this before, that's typically the look that most people refer back to, is that green version. X-Men Unlimited Infinity #35 and 40, we see her there in just a single panel, and she's eating in like the cafeteria area of Krakoa, and then she's depicted in a single panel as having been slain in the Axe Judgment Day, AXE Judgment Day #1. We see her in a single panel at the Krakoa Bar in Marauders #5. She appears again in X-Men Unlimited Infinity #68. There's nothing special here. It's just more of the Dark Rider stuff. But I will call out, I didn't get a picture for it, but I will call out X-Men Unlimited Infinity #75 to 79 as being a refreshing attempt at a Marrow-centric story by someone who seems to more or less get the character, or at least a version of her. Oh, I didn't write the author's name down. I actually tried to reach out to the writer, and because of the way social media was set up, the person couldn't receive messages. And so if you happen to, you can look it up. It's really, really good. I'm bummed I didn't put the name in my notes. You know what? Editing BW, can you throw up just a little subtitle or something with the person's name? Thank you. Okay, and then I won't even spoil that story. It's not anything super grandiose, but it's just a really refreshing to like go through all these little bits and pieces and blah blah blah, and then it's like, oh, here's someone who's actually trying to write Marrow. And I read some of the things that the author was talking about. Like I read like an interview with him, and it was just really cool to see somebody who's kind of putting in the work. And so I'm not going to spoil anything about it. The Infinity comics are like, you constantly scroll for them, like there's no panels or pages. It was interesting, but it's a cool read if you have a minute and you have access to X-Men Unlimited Infinity #75, 76, 77, 78, 79. It's really cool. I liked it. Let's see. Oh, right. And then we go back to, there's some cameos in X-Men Hellfire Gala, which is just a single panel where she's at the end and going through a portal, which will pick up in Realm of X. We also see her in X-Men Hellfire Gala Last Rites Infinity in a single panel, and then X-Men Unlimited Infinity #104 in a single panel. And I guess at some point she was up for a vote, and like readers could vote for who would join the team or something like that, and she lost. Okay. So I mentioned Realm of X. So we come to a series that was released in August of 2023, and it's called Realm of X. Interestingly, they give her full name as Sarah Rushman, which is the alias that S.H.I.E.L.D. had her use way back in Spider-Man Marrow from 20 years ago. This was never really her name, though, as we discussed already. And once again, Marrow is really just used as a fighter here. There's no real attention given to her history or to her motivations, and there's no real explanation for her accent that she appears to have. Like, she's like, bloody hell, like, what? Where did that come from? And she does it more than once. So there's a moment in issue #2. There's only 4 issues in Realm of X. So in issue #2, there's this moment where she's made to relive horror. Like there's a magical effect going on, and all of the characters are reliving a horror from their memory. And of all of the things that we've covered, the thing that she seems to be remembering is something that happened in X-Force, the Alexandria incident, which is sort of the inciting event that caused Cable to form the team in the first place in X-Force. And it's revealed that he found Marrow at Ground Zero after having been operated on by the bad guy whose name was Volga. So presumably the thing that she's feeling guilty about is the loss of her child. She's certainly isn't responsible for the Alexandria incident itself, and the Alexandria incident itself is not really even fully fleshed out in X-Force. It's just a big thing that went on, people died, mutants might get blamed, Cable forms a team to go after the real villains. So I'm guessing it was something more to do with losing the child. But she didn't lose the child because of the Alexandria incident. She lost the child because she went to the bad guy to get whatever. So it's just kind of, I think someone is reaching for Marrow details and just not able to grasp them all. Or perhaps, full disclosure, maybe they're just trying to take the character in a different direction, which wouldn't be the first time, right? At this point, though, so all that being said about the Alexandria incident, right? I wrote, at this point, when we have Kitty Pryde, well, let me back up and say, so obviously, if you're not picking up what I'm trying to insinuate, Marrow has been through far more traumatic experiences, and if you're asking what she would feel guilty about, she could feel guilty about ditching the Morlocks. She could feel guilty about what she did as part of Gene Nation any of the times. She could feel guilty about Agent Zero killing all of her friends and leaving her alive. She could feel guilty about joining the X-Men and betraying her values / leaving the X-Men and not doing that. She could feel guilty about a lot of things. Okay, that's the thing they chose. The Mutant Massacre. Do you guys remember there was this thing called the Mutant Massacre? Yeah. There's all kinds of things that you could draw on if you're looking for when Marrow has a horrible time. And yet they chose the Alexandria incident. Okay, sure. And so at this point, I'm reading my notes now. At this point, when we have Kitty Pryde, who is naming her own team the Marauders, and I struggle to want to just come through the microphone and be louder, but I don't want to mess up my sound system. The Marauders. Kitty Pryde is calling her team the Marauders. Why? But we're obviously supposed to have kind of like discarded the Mutant Massacre, right? Well, it was a thing that happened maybe, but not important anymore. All right, deep breath. Even a cursory study of Marrow would indicate that event was far more significant than the loss of her child, which she easily gets over in a couple issues. Anyway, it's never brought up again. And I don't think it's a boomer take to say that the more recent X titles have kind of lost their way, but we're going to talk more about that in the next video. As far as Marrow is concerned, we have covered or mentioned every one of her appearances in comics that I was able to find as of the end of Realm of X and the publishing of this video. I do have a conclusion video planned, which may end up actually as 2 videos, with one being more standalone. I'm not really sure how I want to divide up my ideas yet, and it will all be finished eventually. I'm not, it's likely going to be 2 videos, with the second video not being Marrow focused, so it's not going to be part of the Marrow series. But I do hope that you've enjoyed the deep dive. Thanks for watching, sticking with us for these hours and hours of videos. I do hope you've enjoyed it and maybe learned something. And if you notice anything that I missed, please let me know. You probably realized that I didn't give a whole lot of visuals for some of the more recent titles. And honestly, it really falls down to some of these titles are still fairly new. And I want to be careful about copyright stuff. We showed some splash images from older issues, and I don't think I would get in any super trouble with that. I erased the text, but with the newer stuff, I would rather just not. The Wrath of Marrow is nothing compared to the Wrath of Mickey, right? Like I have no interest in earning the ire of Disney in the sky, and so I just didn't do it. But most of these are readily available, and so you're probably still able to access them and read them yourselves, which I mostly recommend. So again, thanks for watching. If you noticed anything I missed, if you have any questions, comments, observations, you can put those down in the comments. I don't know when the next video will be out. Probably it will be the last video in this series, but then I'll do another video follow-up in a more general sense about lessons we can learn. I think that's my plan. At the moment, that's my plan. But my continuity is about as messy as Marrow's, so it may not turn out that way. All right, let's bring it to a close. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Excelsior.